the false prophet, who had performed in its presence the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. Where did we learn about the beast and the false prophet? Where does this come from?
Revelation
chapter 13. All of chapter 13 is about the beast, what we would commonly call the Antichrist, and his compatriot, the false prophet. He's described in symbolic form as the beast out of the sea and the beast out of the earth. Remember that? So this is a carry forward of those same images, because it talks about those who receive the mark of the beast. Where do we learn about the mark of the beast? Revelation chapter 13. Right. Anything to do about the beast, go to Revelation 13, because that's where you read about it. Either the one out of the sea or the earth. The mark of the beast, chapter 13. Okay? Specifically, verse 18. Because that's specific about those who receive the mark, and it's 666. Remember that? Okay. So, this beast was captured, and his false prophet, and these two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Hear that? It's not the pleasant place, shall we say, okay? And the rest, what rest? His followers, these armies that are following the beast, were killed by the sword of the rider on the horse, the sword that comes from his mouth, and all the birds were gorged with their flesh. That's the gory, grisly scene that we ended up with last week. Okay? So on your outline, by the way, if you need an outline, who needs an outline? Come. Please, grab one.
Anybody else?
Yes. One. Just one page. Okay. What we have here is, if you will, a reversal. What do you mean reversal? Well, the angel calls for the birds of the air to eat the flesh of these kings that are, if you will, slaughtered by Christ at his second coming. Now that's kind of an ironic switch, because Jesus, in John chapter 6, invites his followers to do what? Eat his flesh. Right? He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me, and I in him. And I will raise him up on the last day. Our belief in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist is based on Jesus' own words about him, his very body being the bread of life. This, because they are the followers of the beast, they become food, if you will, for the birds. And as I mentioned, these birds, in this case, are negative symbols. This is not the pleasant thing that you want to have happen to you. This imagery of the birds goes all the way back to like Genesis. You mean Genesis? Well, you remember the story of Joseph, the Technicolor Dreamcoat guy? when he was in Egypt. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Do you remember the scene where he was in the jail? He got thrown into jail because he was accused of trying to rape Potiphar's wife. Remember that? When it was actually she who was coming on to him. Remember that? So he ended up in jail. And who was in jail with him?
The baker and the butler.
The butler, or the cupbearer, and the baker of the Pharaoh. And they both had dreams. And Joseph interpreted their dreams. The baker's dream was that he was carrying 3 baskets on his head. And the birds of the air came and started eating the bread out of the baskets. Remember that? And Joseph said, in 3 days you'll be released, but you're going to be killed, and the birds of the air will eat your flesh. And in 3 days, that's exactly what happened. And then the butler, or the cupbearer, said, well, you know, I've had a dream too. And his dream was he had a bunch of grapes in his hand. He squeezed it into the cup of Pharaoh. And Joseph interpreted that dream, and he said, in 3 days you'll be released and you'll be restored to your position. And he says, when you do, remember me. And in 3 days he was, but the butler forgot about him. And so Joseph was left in jail. And then the Pharaoh had a dream. And he saw 7 ears of grain that were very fat. And then he saw 7 ears of grain that were very withered. And the withered grain ate up the fat ears of grain. And he wondered, what does that mean? And then he had a second dream about cows, and the same thing. Fat cows, emaciated cows, and the emaciated cows ate the other. And he goes, what does this mean? And he had no idea. And then the butler remembered his companion in the prison. He goes, oh yeah, when I was in prison, this dude interpreted me and the baker's dream, and they were absolutely right. So he got out. Joseph told Pharaoh told Joseph his dreams. They were right. He was telling them there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. So you better make silos and start planning for the 7 years of want. And because of that, he not only saved Egypt, but all the surrounding nations around him as well, because they came to Egypt to buy food. And so Joseph was made the second in the land. The point is, the baker's dream had birds, and they were a negative symbol. That's the first sign in these prophetic visions that have negative symbols for birds. In the New Testament, I mentioned how Jesus tells the story of the parable of the sower. And that one I can jump to. Matthew chapter 13. Oops. Why are you doing that? Am I pressing the wrong key? Matthew 13. There we go. So here's the parable of the sower. He sowed seed on the ground. Some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Others fell on rocky ground, sprang up, had no depth, and when the sun rose, they were scorched. Others fell among thorns. The thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100, 60, and 30-fold. Anyone with ears, listen. Well, he goes on and tells several other parables, and the disciples said, you remember that one about the sower? Well, what did it mean? Well, Jesus said, here's what the parable means. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what's sown in the heart. That is what is sown on the path. So here is a very clear connection between the birds in the parable and the evil one. You catch that connection? Because if you go back to the story part, some fell on the path, the birds ate it. What does that mean? It means when someone hears the word of God, the evil one plucks it out of their heart. So the birds become a negative symbol here. Okay? By the way, what is that sound?
I don't know.
Over there,
Do you know how to turn it on?
Kasi nagluluto si Deb.
I thought it would eventually just shut off on its own, but
It's annoying.
it is. I agree. So the point is, I don't want to go through the whole parable. The point I'm making here is that in prophetic terms, it's not 100%, but more often than not, birds are seen as negative symbols. Now, of course, there are positive symbols for birds. Okay, like the dove in the story of Noah, for example. It's the dove that brings back the olive branch that tells Noah that the waters are receding. Okay? In the story of Elijah, when there's the famine that he prays for, he goes by a river, and the birds bring him food. God commands the ravens to bring him bread and meat. So the birds are in service to the prophet. Okay? So it's not always a negative symbol, but more often than not, in prophetic terms, and the book of Revelation is certainly prophecy, or in parabolic terms, birds are typically negative symbols. So that's what I want to bring out, because in this example, back to Revelation 19, the birds of the air here are not a positive thing. Okay? This is a negative symbol. This is what I would say is the reverse of the saints that follow Jesus. They fed on the flesh of the Lamb and are now following him in defeat of the Antichrist. Those that follow the Antichrist become food for the birds. Okay? So there is a reciprocal negative feedback here, if that makes sense. You following me here? Okay. So that's what I wanted to point out here. I also wanted to point out this expression here. Here. Both free and slave, both small and great. These describe those that follow the beast and the false prophet. This goes back to Revelation 13. Like I said, Revelation 13 is where we read everything about the two beasts. The beast out of the sea, and the beast. Oh, good. Were you able to turn it off?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, good. Thank you. It's the second beast, the false prophet, is the one that causes, notice this in verse 16, also it causes it. Notice it's not a he, it's an it, it's a beast. Okay, the beast out of the earth. It causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked. Did you catch that? So this same phraseology is certainly connecting these two images together. I mean, it's very clear as to the identity of these two people that Jesus overcomes, but it also indicates those that follow him, which are the same ones back here that received a mark on their forehead or their right hand, so that no one can buy or sell who does not have this mark. This is the infamous mark of the beast that we went over several weeks ago. Okay? And that this mark is not necessarily a physical thing. We're talking primarily a spiritual marking, just like the ones who were marked in chapter 7. Remember that? The 144,000? Okay? Same kind of thing. It's not necessarily a physical thing. Okay? So I just want to be clear about that. What is the mark of the beast? It is a designation that you are following the political powers here on earth over God. It is a sign that you are in connection with them and not God. So that leads me to this whole image. What does the defeat of the Antichrist mean? It has this two elements to it. Okay? And the two aspects are this. There is certainly an eschatological understanding of something that will happen at the end of time. Meaning Jesus literally coming back and defeating the character that we call the Antichrist at the end of time. There is certainly that element of it. Okay? That element is but one meaning that is being described here. Okay? What is the more eternal message? Okay, because that's going to happen at the end of time. So what does that have to do with us now? Is this nothing? Do we just forget about it and wait till the end of time, until it's fulfilled? No. The eternal message that's being described here is Jesus' advancement of the kingdom now, which defeats the spirit of the Antichrist.